talk a little bit about the idea that we live on this crust, that the Earth is, the Earth is really a huge, huge planet, but we depend on such a tiny little bit. Is that me?
Yeah.
We depend on such a tiny, tiny little bit of the crust of the Earth for our existence. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the roots of our food crops only go down a few inches. And so what they have access to is what we get in our food. Now, a plant will absorb anything that's become soluble and goes into solution, whether it needs it or not. And so whatever's in the soil, the plant will take it up. And as I showed you in the slide, nutritional minerals do not occur in a uniform blanket around the crust of the Earth.
That's
they
such an important point.
In veins, like chocolate and chocolate ripple ice cream. And so I used to ask my dad when I was a kid, and some of you will relate to this, because we'd go to church all the time, and there were good Christians who would go to church. They were good farmers. They didn't do anything bad. They didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't say bad words, went to church every Sunday. They helped each other out. When one family was sick, they'd do work for no fee to help the families out. And they'd die in their 40s of heart attacks and cancer. And here's these hellions that live down the road. They're drinking and smoking, do everything bad. They steal from you. If you were sick in the hospital, they'd come and rob your house. And they lived to be 102. And so I'm saying, Dad, how can that be? And he said, well, that's just the way it is. And I couldn't figure it out. Well, the reason was, by dumb luck, the hellions had bought a piece of property that had more minerals in it than the good Christians. Because the good Christians were maybe getting 10 minerals in their wood ashes, and the hellions were getting 60 minerals in their wood ashes, just by dumb luck. So the only way you can prevent that from happening is to supplement, and that way you're getting everything you need.
You didn't mention this in the book, but you told me this. I've talked to you. You've told me this personally. I wonder if you mind telling the story about how you personally experienced the power of nutritional supplementation as a young boy.
Yes, well, that story's in the book, Dead Doctors Don't Lie. So I didn't want to repeat the story. So every time you read one of Wallach's books, you're going to hear that same story.
That's a great story.
Yeah, it's a great story. And that's, when I was 4 years old, I developed facial tics, eyelid blinks and facial squinches, and I'd grunt and make noise, and today we'd call that Tourette syndrome. And it got
genetic.
Yeah, genetic. It progressively worse. By the time I was 9 years old, it was very disabling, and all my friends thought I was possessed, is what they would say. And they could set it off. They would come up to me and bump up against me, or they'd slam a book on something and make a big noise, and I'd go into one of these things, like a seizure almost. And my mom took me to an eye doctor, and it was an MD eye doctor, and the eye doctor, I'm 9 years old, and the doctor examines me and says, well, there's nothing wrong with him, can't find anything wrong with him. The only thing I can find is he's got long eyelashes that are hitting his glasses, curling back, and probably tickling his eyeballs. That's what's making this happen. That's what the doctor said. And so I said, okay, what do you suggest we do about this? And she says, well, here's a Maybelline eyelash brush. I want you to retrain your eyelashes so they go straight and they don't hit your glasses and curl back and tickle your eyeballs. And I said, no, ma'am, I'm not going to do that because I'm starting to play sports. And that was before don't ask, don't tell, right? And I said, these guys are going to rip my arms off and beat me to death with my own arms. So I said, I'm not going to do that. So I go to the school the next day, and I went to the library, and I found a nurse's handbook. And I went to the index, and I tried to look up eyelashes, eyelids, couldn't find anything in the book. So I just started in the A's, and I go down word by word by word by word, and I get down to cramps in the C's, and I heard the word cramps before because I'm playing sports. And so I said, well, maybe it's a facial cramp. So that day, when I got home from school, instead of going and starting on my chores or doing my homework, I ran to the barn and started eating calf pellets. Because every day before the bus would pick me up to take me to school, one of my chores was to feed the little bull calves, which are from purebred Angus cattle. We were going to sell them at auction. We only needed 2 or 3 bulls. And so the heifer calves, we'd stay to have more calves, but we only needed 2 or 3 bulls. So every bull calf, we would groom them up and halter train them, and so they'd be tame, and sell them in the sale barn. And, you know, you're a curious kid, you're feeding these calves, and what are you feeding them? So you're reading the analysis label and say protein and fiber, fat, vitamin A, vitamin B1, and calcium. Calcium, well, that's what the book says missing when you have a cramp. So I said, well, okay. So I started eating those calf pellets. The next morning, I threw the Cheerios out to the chickens, and I filled my cereal bowl full of calf pellets, put milk on them. My mom started taking them away from my dad, pushes her back. He says, no, no, maybe he's got something here. And by the third day, my Tourette syndrome was gone, after getting progressively worse for 5 years.
That's awesome.
And the next time those guys dropped a book on the table, I punched them. So they stopped doing that.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
I want to, how much time do you have? I got a couple more things I want to say, and then if you guys have some questions, I'll ask. Where's Peter? Peter, how much time? We can keep going? Okay. There's an interesting little story in here about the Rosicrucians and the role that the Rosicrucians played in the development of health and the understanding of the body. Talk a little bit about that. You guys ever hear the Rosy Cross, Order of the Rosy Cross, the Rosicrucians? They're like an occult fraternity, if you will. They were responsible for a lot of esoteric knowledge, and a lot of this wisdom, a lot of this medical, a lot of what went for medical wisdom, was purported to be medical wisdom, was really kind of occult understandings back in the 16th and 17th centuries even.
Yeah, and they were similar to what we would call Masons today. And
Right.
everybody knows about the Masonic cults and that sort of thing, and the third degree Mason and
Right.
that kind of stuff. And the Rosicrucians were kind of an offshoot of that. And they would collect all scientific knowledge, and they were the holders of all this sort of knowledge.
They kept it secret, kind of.
Yeah, it was a secret cult. Only
Right.
they knew this knowledge. And they never said what they did with it. They just accumulated it, and they were the holders of this secret knowledge.
John Dee was involved with a lot of the stuff, the astrologer, for Queen Elizabeth's astrologer.
Again, people who are very wealthy, people who are nobility, people who are kings and queens and so forth, are said to be parts of these groups and so forth. How much of that's true, I don't know, but they're said to be parts of these groups. And certainly, you can see where they make silly mistakes and they do stupid things, and they blame it on the fact, in quotation marks, fact that they belong to the Rosicrucians or they're Masons and that sort of stuff.
It seems like there's always been a tendency for wisdom to stay in kind of isolated strata, isolated layers of the society.
Like in medical doctors today.
Exactly. Historically, there's always been a tendency to withhold knowledge and withhold information. And as a pharmacist, I always get a kick out of hearing people's diagnoses, the Latin diagnoses. Why do you think diagnoses are in Latin? Do you ever wonder why they're in Latin English? Right? Why should they have to be in Latin? What's the point of that? The point is, and we do it in pharmacy all the time, how many of you guys have seen your prescription and you say, what the heck is that about? It's in Latin. They don't want you to know what it is. There's a mystery that's associated with it, and it seems like this is a way that knowledge gets kept from people throughout history.
Exactly. And you've all heard of the Hippocratic Oath.
Right.
And the Hippocratic Oath, however you want to say it, everybody thinks it says, first do no harm. But that's not what the Hippocratic Oath says. It says, don't tell anybody who's not a physician our secrets. That's what it says.
Do you know the Hippocratic Oath says you won't give any drugs, you won't give any poisons, you won't have any unnecessary surgeries? Do you know that's the Hippocratic Oath?
And you won't give any herb or metal that will cause abortions.
Or abortions. You won't give any abortifacients. And by the way, I found this out recently. Doctors don't have to take the Hippocratic Oath. Did you know that?
No, they don't have to.
They don't have to take the Hippocratic Oath. In case anybody, do you guys ever hear of the Hippocratic Oath? Hippocratic Oath is this oath that doctors were supposedly, all doctors take. It says do no harm, etc. Well, as it turns out, they don't even take the darn Hippocratic Oath any longer, understandably so. They'd be lying every time they did it, every time they went to work. But part of the Hippocratic Oath is I won't give any drugs unnecessarily. We won't do any surgeries unnecessarily. How do you like that statistic on the unnecessary surgeries? Billions and hundreds of billions of dollars in unnecessary surgeries and procedures. Okay, couple more things that come to mind here. Let's talk about. You had an interesting quote here from one of my favorite authors, a guy named Clifford Pickover. Have you read? Clifford Pickover has written a whole bunch of books, and he has a book called The Medical Book. He has a quote in here: "Epigenetics refers to the study of heritable traits caused by nutritional deficiencies that do not involve changes in the underlying DNA sequence." This really cuts to the chase of what epigenetics is about.
That's the definition of epigenetics.
Right. That's what epigenetics is really about. The idea that you can have a messed up body without necessarily having your genes out of sequence, simply by affecting the things that turn those genes on and off, what we call nutrients. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's the whole basis of the book, Pharmacist Ben. And that is, in 1958, I started doing epigenetics experiments in experimental zoology at the University of Missouri. That was one of the elective courses I took.
Not called epigenetics, of course.
It was called experimental biology back then. And basically what we could do was take connective tissue from a tendon or skin of a tadpole and take a heart from a tadpole and squeeze that heart and drop heart juice on that tendon or that connective tissue, that stem cell, if you would, and turn it into heart. It would duplicate into heart muscle.
That's awesome.
It was really just
That's
by
super high-tech stuff.
Yeah, super high-tech stuff back in 1958. I'm just an 18-year-old kid and we're doing this stuff.
Amazing.
And what it taught me was that we can actually control genes. We can control genes from the outside. And of course you can. And as Pharmacist Ben very eloquently said many times here when he was introducing me, that you can, in fact, control how genes work, because genes require mineral and vitamin cofactors like every other organelle or tissue in your body. Organelle meaning microscopic little things that do things inside of each cell. And of course, the things that DNA does is duplicate amino acids primarily is what they do to make proteins. And the thing you have to appreciate is it requires stuff to do that. It requires energy. It requires helpers, just like a factory. You can have the most beautiful factory in the world. It's got everything. I mean, it's got every machine you can think of, but there's no electricity going in there. You can have all the help you want, but there's no energy coming in there. You ain't making nothing. You can have the best energy. You can have all the helpers, all the employees, but if you don't have the raw materials, you ain't making nothing. In the same way with genes as that factory. Now, one of the things, another explanation of this is my favorite, is that in school we were taught that genes are blueprints of life. That's the word they use, are blueprints of life.
That's right.
The genes just hammer out the same blueprint, the same tool, the same piece over and over and over, unimpeachable. If you have a good gene, it's going to pump out the good pattern. Well, it turns out that genes are not blueprints. They're scripts. There's a huge difference between a script and a blueprint. A blueprint saying you use the same labor force, use the same raw materials, the soil type is the same whether you're going to build the church or the house or the factory in China, in India, in North Dakota, in Arkansas, in Texas, in South America.
It's duplicatable. That's the whole point of it.
The whole thing will be exactly the same no matter who builds it, where it's at, as long as everything
McDonald's
is
hamburgers.
Exactly. Duplicate over and over and over. But that's not true. Genes are like a script, and a script can be modified by the actor, the director, and the producer. I'll give you an example. My favorite example is one of my favorite movies is Titanic. The original black and white movie is a great movie, and as the ship is sinking horizontally with the surface of the ocean before it went vertical and broke in half, there was a little 9-year-old boy, I'm making up his name because I forget his name in the movie, but Frankie jumps off the lifeboat back onto the ship, and his father is mortified. He says, "Frankie, you're 9 years old. You're supposed to be with all the women and children. Anybody under 12 years old gets to survive. Get back on the lifeboat." And he says, "No, Father, I'm wearing long pants and I'm going down with the men." There wasn't a dry eye in the theater. I mean, everybody was so emotional and crying. Well, that was in 1948, 1950 when that movie was made. Well, in 1998 or 2000, whenever the movie was remade, it was color, where the original was black and white. Also, who was it that jumped off the lifeboat back onto the ship? That event happened, but it wasn't a 9-year-old Frankie anymore. It was a young woman by the name of Rose, about in her mid-20s, who jumped back onto the ship to be with her lover, Jack. Same script, same story.
Different script.
Well, same script, but it was modified.
Modified script.
It was modified script by the producer, by the actors and director. And that's what happens to your genes. Things are missing, you get weird things happening. You have things coming in there that's too much, you get weird things happening. And so we have to be very, very good about what we do to take care of our genes. And this is what our new product, Immortalium, is all about.
Love it.
Yeah, Immortalium is based on the 2009 Nobel Prize-winning science, where you can modify everything, including the lifespan of the telomeres, which are the end caps of the chromosomes. and that determines how many duplications you're going to get out of a normal cell. And so this product, Immortalium, is based on that science. We're the first company to come out there with this. Everybody else is so confused how to do this in such a manner that you're going to get the same effect as they did in the test tube. And, you know, based on all the autopsy they've done, based on all the chemistry and so forth, as Pharmacist Ben says, when you do all this stuff, you have a more clearer picture of what to expect when you modify things. And so we put this together, and then we tested it in test tubes with human cells, and it works. You can actually increase the duplication from 51, which was the Hayflick limit, to over 100 duplications.
I mean, genes, we want to think of our genes as structures, really.
Yes, well, they are.
They're structures,
They're
right?
physical structures.
Just like every other structure of the body needs to be sustained, it needs raw materials, it needs what it needs. It needs basics to do its work. Genes are the
fuel.
same. Genes are the same way.
Yes.
It needs fuel, exactly. If they don't have enough energy, they're not going to turn on. And by the way, our genes turn on and off all the time. All the time, even as we're sitting here. As we're thinking thoughts, our genes are turning on and off. Our genes are blinking on and off like Christmas tree lights, essentially. As you think a thought, you make genetic changes. So really, every biochemist knows this. This is not a new thing. This is really basic biochemistry. You think a thought, your genes change. You feel a feeling, your genes change. You're nutritionally deficient, your genes change. So if we're dealing with diseases that are the manifestations of genetic changes, don't blame the genes. It's not the genes' fault. They're turning on and off based on things that we're doing, correct?
And you've mentioned this earlier this evening, but it just kind of ties this up in a little ribbon. I get people all the time, Pharmacist Ben, who will say, no, wait a minute, Wallach. I have 5 generations of my family with diabetes. It's got to be genetic. No, it's epigenetic. Well, how can that be? It's 5 generations. Well, that's because your mama and her mama and your sisters are passing on gluten intolerance to their kids. And the gluten intolerance, you can't absorb nutrients.
That's
okay?
That's a big factor.
That's a big one. And so if you can't absorb nutrients, and there's very little of these particular minerals in the soil in that area, you won't do very well. You're going to get that disease that's caused by the deficiency of that mineral.
And you're eating muffins for breakfast, and you're having lots of bread, and you're eating oatmeal, and your cereals, and your
all the sources of gluten.
All the sources of gluten that we all eat, correct?
Exactly.
See,
and even if you think you're avoiding gluten, you're getting it hidden.
That's right. That was a brilliant point about it's in the dust. Do you guys get when he said saying dog food and cat food? There's dust in the air. There's gluten dust in the air. Your spouses get gluten.
And the dog lays his head on your lap, and you pet him, and then you rub your face, or you pet him, and unseen dust, you're inhaling it. And then you take the sheets that the dog's laid on, you throw them in the washer with your clothes and so forth, and it's just this cross-contamination. They use breadcrumbs and cracker crumbs to hold meatloaf and meatballs together.
They inject chicken with it. They inject chicken with gluten to make the chicken
puff up.
To make the chicken. You ever have a piece of chicken and it looks like a big fat piece of chicken? You bite into it and it's air. Food processors love air, by the way. I mean, we all love air, but food processors really love air because it makes their food expand and increases their profit margin. You know how much cereal's in a box of cereal, or how much grain or solid is in a box of cereal? It's like
a teaspoon.
A teaspoon, maybe, if that. You're buying $3 worth of air. You're better off eating the box. You'll get some fiber if you eat the box. Seriously, that's how, when they learned how to extrude and they learned how to puff foods up, and food processing and food technology really took a big quantum leap forward. And gluten, start off by saying gluten is injected into chickens and strawberries. By the way, you know, if you think you're gluten-free and you're not, and you can't figure out where the heck the gluten is, you have no idea where it might be hiding.
You have to read labels very well when it comes to gluten.
Are there disguise? There's disguise.
They're in disguise. For instance, you buy a bag of nuts at one of these very famous health food stores, like Whole Foods or something like that, very, very well respected. On the bag it says, on the front, naturally gluten-free in big, bold letters. And it's true, nuts are naturally gluten-free. But then you roll that puppy over and you look in the allergen section. It says, these nuts have been processed on equipment. They've been packaged on equipment that also packages wheat products.
That's right.
So all the dust in that bag is wheat dust.
And you think you're gluten-free. and you can't figure out where it's coming from, and you got all the signs of gluten intolerance. If you have, chances are pretty darn good, right? Would you say chances are pretty darn good? If you have arthritis, you have an inflammatory disease, if you have some kind of illness and you can't figure out where the heck it's coming from, and you try to do everything you could do, the chances are pretty good that you're interfacing with gluten on some level, or something like gluten.
And I got to throw in, it's generational in your family. Everybody in your family's got the disease.
Right. And it is 30%, as you say in the book, 30% of people, and it might even be more.
Well, the newest statistics since that book came out is now 70%.
70% gluten intolerant.
Yes.
When you think about it, you guys, gluten is a plant defense system. It's a way plants prevent us from eating it. It's a way plants punish those who would be dumb enough to eat them. That's basically what it is. So it makes sense that we would all be. Do you guys get that? It's a way plants prevent themselves from being eaten. Plants don't want to be eaten. No, nothing wants to be eaten. So plants don't want to be eaten. They make these things like gluten, and it keeps predators from eating them. Of course, we don't pay any attention to it, and we keep eating it. So it's very different. This is 70%. I wouldn't be surprised, Doc, if it ends up being even more than 70%. Just from evolution, you would think that they developed these systems affect everybody.
This is not a new thing, because the Egyptians 4,000 years ago
gluten intolerant. They had arthritis and stuff. Yes. They had all of this.
And another thing for gluten intolerance, you usually find that people have multiples of disease, like you're pointing out. I mean, we're talking they have arthritis, diabetes, high blood pressure, low thyroid, macular degeneration, dementia, bulging disc, kidney stones.
They have a name for all this, by the way. They call it metabolic syndrome. You guys ever hear this term, metabolic syndrome? That's like everything's wrong. Whatever can happen. They just had to come up with a phrase to say.
Mitochondrial disease.
Or mitochondrial disease, right. It means you're falling apart is what it means, basically. You're dissolving into a puddle, and it's based on things like nutritional deficiency and gluten and things that we have control over, that's really ultimately what the message is. Self-inflicted, as you say. Okay, a couple last things I just want to say, and then, do you mind can we take a question or two? I don't want to impose. Yeah, you sure? Do you guys want to do that?
I slept on the airplane.
I'm just going to ask a couple more questions, and then we'll open it up. I would be remiss if I didn't mention what I think is the most important recognition that Youngevity has achieved. Youngevity has achieved a lot of recognition, but one of the most important, at least the way I look at it, is the Clemson Study. So I want you to spend a couple minutes talking about the Clemson Study.
Okay, the Clemson Study is where we ask Clemson University from Clemson, South Carolina, very well-respected medical school. They're famous for investigating everything. That's what they do. But they do it with human cell lines in cell culture. And it's not invasive. It's not like the Nazis cutting people up and everything. They're doing cell culture, so it's very clever that they went that direction. And we gave them two products, our Ultimate Classic, which is our original liquid multiple, goes way back 20-something years, and then also our newest one, the Beyond Tangerine 2.0. And we had them run the cell cultures against these. And when you had the Ultimate Classic, it's just beautiful. It had a 95% cure rate when it came to colon cancer, 65% kill rate of stomach and pancreatic cancer, and 32% kill rate of breast cancer. That's the Ultimate Classic by itself, without anything else. And then when you took the Beyond Tangerine 2.0, the colon cancer was 65%, the stomach and the pancreatic cancer was 65%, and the breast cancer, again, was 32%. So both of them are just fantastic. And we have another study coming out now from a Canadian university, Manitoba, the University of Manitoba, where we did the same studies in rats that have cancers, and rats that have lupus, and rats that have heart disease. It's actually done, and really we were supposed to have the information for the annual meeting a couple of weeks ago, but it's going to be out by June.
Nice. Oh, that's
very
awesome.
Exciting.
That
very
is
exciting.
That is very exciting. All right. So before we open it up to some questions, let's just sum this whole thing up. What do you want people, when they are done reading this book, what do you want people to come away with? What do you want people to have in their heads? What do you want them to know when they leave?
Well, thank you, Pharmacist Ben, for asking me that question, because that's the ultimate question here. Why would you write a 600-page book, for goodness sakes? Okay, well, the whole purpose of that book is to make each individual to be in a position where they're in control. The whole idea is to give them enough information where they're in control. They can actually prevent every disease you can name, every affliction they don't want to have anything to do with, for themselves, their kids and their grandkids, their great-grandkids, their brothers and sisters, their church mates. You read this book, and if you employ it, you can make your church and your church family diabetes-free in 2 months. You can make your own family, your blood family, diabetes-free and arthritis-free, back problem-free in 2 months. You can take people in your family who have macular degeneration, that are legally blind for 6, 8, 10 years, and you can make them see again 20/20 within 90 days, just with the information in this book. That gives you power to have that knowledge. It's biblical. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. I mean, knowledge is everything. And the whole idea of putting this book together in such a manner where you start out with the very basics of things and build on it and build on it and build on it and build on it, you will be able to take every disease that's known and either prevent them or reverse them. That's power. What that does is take the responsibility away from the medical doctors, and so you're not going to get killed. Remember, this is from the Center for Disease Control in the Journal of the American Medical Association, February 5th, 2007. Medical doctors kill, injure, and infect 15 million of their customers in their workplace every year in America alone. Why would you want to take your beautiful newborn baby to a pediatrician when you can do it yourself? Why would you want to take your mother to a hospital for a test when you can do them yourself? You don't need a colonoscopic exam. You can get the equivalent of it in any pharmacy without a prescription. The occult blood test or the FIT test, the fecal immunochemical test, which is a new one out. You can do these things in your own home. You get the same answers you would from a colonoscopic exam and no risk of being killed like Andy Rooney was. This is the purpose of writing this book. So you have all the facts here. You can take this power and you can save yourself, save your family, save your church, save your county, save your state, and ultimately save America. That's the whole purpose of it.
That's awesome. And by the way, the end of the book, there's like a vitamin and mineral compendium. Mm-hmm. So even there's great stories in the book. There's history in the book. You get Dr. Wallach's story as well, but there's also a compendium of all vitamins and minerals at the end of the book too.
What they each do.
Yeah, what they each do. It's just a handy source on top of everything else. It's a handy little tool resource to have. Dr. Wallach, I know I speak for a lot of people, and I know I speak for you guys here, and I speak for myself as well. Thank you so much for everything you do.
You're very welcome.
And it's an honor and a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we'll take some questions. Thank you. Give them a big hand. And we'll take some questions. We'll stay as long as you need. Doc Wallach, believe it or not, will be here till 3 in the morning if you guys want him to be.
No.
Oh, okay. 2 in the morning or 1 in the morning, I'm sure. Okay, go ahead.